Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Ken Dossar, and we are continuing our look at the Zumbi cultural series. Tonight's event continues our journey into the history of the foundational and foundational relationships and exchanges between cultural workers and social activists and educators of color in the United States and the Afro-Brazilian community, particularly in Bahia. Our journey tonight takes us out of Salvador, Bahia, and it takes us to the countryside, to the city of Cachoeira. The city sits below a series of hillsides on the Paraguaçu River. Affectionately known as the Jewel of the Recôncavo, Cachoeira has its origins back in 1531. It is at the center of Brazil's best tobacco growing region. By the 18th century, tobacco from Cachoeira was considered among the world's finest. But more for our purposes this evening, Cachoeira is also a renowned center of candomblé. For this session, our expert guide is Professor Xavier Vatin. He and his team, through their film, Memorias Afro-Atlantic Legacies, they introduce us to the pioneering work, that is, of the first Afro-American linguist, Professor Lorenzo Turner, who arrived in Cachoeira in 1940. And there he explored the continuation of African culture, particularly in the languages. Professor Turner had a particular focus on the sacred traditions of candomblé. Professor Turner was among the notable anthropologists, sociologists, folklorists, musicologists who turned their attention to Brazil and its African cultural continuances and their reconfigurations. These scholars, African-American scholars, include Professor Irene Diggs, who collaborated with Professor W.E.B. Du Bois, Professor Du Bois himself, and E. Franklin Frazier. During the first decade of the 20th century, Brazil was, at first glance, idealized as a utopian tropical melting pot. But by the mid-1950s, the myth of Brazil as a racial paradise was challenged and eventually rejected by African-American observers who came to know and uncover the illusions, the contradictions, the reality, and the depth of Brazil's profound racial and social problems. And we continue that work here this evening. Professor Turner's work showed the continuity of language and African culture throughout the diaspora. I'd like to introduce my guest and colleague, Dr. Xavier Vatin. He's an ethnomusicologist and associate professor of anthropology, that is, at the Federal University of the Recôncavo in Bahia. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Musicology, a Master of Arts, and a PhD in social anthropology. Professor Vatin's research is focused on Afro-Brazilian religions, ethnomusicology, visual anthropology, and Afro-Atlantic cultures and languages. He has written several books. He has written chapters in books, journals. He has CDs and documentary films in Brazil, France, the United States, Switzerland, and Germany. Dr. Vatin served as a visiting professor at various universities, including Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, in 2012. His Afro-Atlantic Legacies project, dedicated to Professor Lorenzo Turner, won the Prêmio Nacional de Expressões Culturais Afro-Brasileiros in Rio de Janeiro. In 2019, Afro-Atlantic Legacies became a documentary film, and Dr. Vatin's ongoing research was awarded an advanced summer study repository research fellowship at Indiana University. In 2020, the second volume of this project has been released, or this year rather, it has been released, and it includes a book and a 4 CD set. A second documentary film is in process as well. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Professor Xavier Vatin.
Thank you so much, Professor Dossar. It's truly an honor to be with you tonight and to be able to talk about our project that started in 2012, 8 years ago. So it's been an 8 years research project between the United States and Brazil, trying to reconnect both countries through their Africanity and mostly through their common linguistic heritage that came from Africa through enslaved Africans. We know that the United States and Brazil are two countries that have been built by slaves. And these are the two countries that have, over the course of 3 centuries, exploited African people and their descendants in both these countries, as well as in the Caribbean. So 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Indiana University, Bloomington, where they had the archives of traditional music. And there I found an amazing collection called the Turner Collection, which has united 329 aluminum discs that Professor Lorenzo Turner recorded in 1940 and 1941 in Bahia. Until 2012, this recording had never been released. And so when I spent a year and a half as a visiting scholar at Indiana University, and I was sure that it was necessary to bring all this collection back to Brazil and to the people who are the inheritance of this heritage, who obviously are the people of Candomblé, the people who are the worshippers of Afro-Brazilian religions here in Bahia. So it's not been easy to find fundings here in Brazil, but finally we were able to have 2 books published and 6 digital albums, and everything has been obviously freely brought back to the communities, the Afro-Brazilian communities, through partnership with Indiana University, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., that has the photographs that Dr. Turner did in his fieldwork in 1940, and many different papers that you can find at the Herskovits Library at Northwestern University in Chicago. So Dr. Lorenzo Turner was the father of the Gullah studies and is well known in the United States in academia for being the first African-American linguist. Came to Bahia because he wanted to explore the Africanity through language and music that was to be found in Candomblé languages and Candomblé music. So he could find hypotheses and basis for his theory that the Gullah language from the Sea Islands in the South Carolina and Georgia area was not bad English, was not baby talk, like many people used to see this language in the 1930s, obviously because of racism and prejudice in the South of the United States. So Dr. Lorenzo Turner was convinced that the Gullah language was a Creole language. And his fieldwork in Bahia that has lasted for 7 months, and he did an amazing fieldwork, was a way to find elements and evidences that could prove that the Gullah language was an African-derived Creole language. And by doing that, he united an amazing collection, and his desire was to bring back to Brazil someday. but he died and he never could come back to Brazil. So in a way, we are extremely honored and proud to have been able to bring back two people here. And we have found not only the descendants of these people who participated to his recordings and who are extremely important in the history of Candomblé in Brazil, but also still people who are still alive, like Mãe Carmen, who is now 92 years old, and she was only 12 when Dr. Turner did these recordings. So this film that we're about to see is the reconnection of this collection with the people within the Candomblé communities that have preserved this heritage through times, and how emotional they got by reuniting with this heritage and with these people who have died since then.
Okay, thank you. One question before we move to the film. What was it in your soul that took you to Cachoeira and had you become who you are now?
Well, I'm French. I came to Bahia 28 years ago in 1992. It was a dream of mine. I'm a musician first, and my passion in music life is African-American music, especially jazz, but also samba and every or any African-derived music in Brazil. So I came to Brazil to study capoeira under the perspective of ethnomusicology, and then I lived 4 years with French anthropologist and photographer Pierre Verger from 92 to 96 until he died in 1996. And the work of Pierre Verger and he himself took me to Candomblé. And so I spent almost 30 years of my life together with Candomblé communities. My children are Afro-Brazilian, and all my history and militancy is related to fighting religious racism here in Brazil, and showing how important the African heritage is in this country. And if I can use my white privilege in this country that also tends to privilege white people, I use it as a tool to struggle against injustice and to give a voice to people that still struggle to have one.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So let's move forward and watch our film. And then after the film is over, we'll come back and talk a little bit more.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
And we're back. Thank you for that, Xavier. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. So let's talk about things we just saw in the film, and let's contextualize it. Where is and what is the Recôncavo?
Okay, the Recôncavo is the area around the Bay of All Saints here in the state of Bahia, and this is historically the cradle of Brazil. This is a place where the Portuguese first arrived, the state of Bahia, in the year 1500. And this is the place where most slaves were brought since the very beginning of the slave trade and slavery here in Brazil. So here in this area, we have something around 80 to 82% of Black people, which is the highest rate and proportion of Black people we have in Brazil in general. And obviously, with this amazing contribution, we have a cultural impact that goes from music to religion and to language and food and dance. So everything you can feel and you can see here in Bahia, and especially in this area of the Recôncavo, that was the place where the sugarcane plantation were started also. So you have an amazing melting pot of African ethnic groups that came from Senegambia, that came from Benin, from Togo, from Nigeria, Angola, Congo, even from Mozambique at the end of slavery. And then you can find different ethnic groups and as we call them, nations within the Candomblé tradition. So to most Brazilians, Bahia, and especially this area around the Bay, is the repository of Africanity in this country. And this is like a symbolic place for African traditions and Afro-Brazilian traditions through music, language, and religion.
And Professor Turner's work basically took place in Cachoeira.
Okay, so Professor Turner arrived in 1940 here in Brazil. He first arrived, he came by boat from New York to Rio de Janeiro. He stayed a few weeks and he was received by an amazing group of intellectuals and artists in Rio. He studied Portuguese there. He already had an amazing career. Professor Turner was born at the end of the 19th century in 1890 in North Carolina. He was the grandson of slaves in this area, and he became the 5th African-American man to graduate from Harvard, where he did his master's thesis. Then he went to the University of Chicago and got his PhD, and then became a professor at Fisk University in the 1930s, together with amazing people like W. Du Bois and E. Franklin Fraser. And so in the 1930s, he started his research, an amazing research on the Gullah language, by recording and becoming a field linguist there. He went to SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where he studied more than 10 different African languages, so he could have the background, the necessary background to be able to identify these languages within the Gullah language. But still, he knew Brazil, and especially Bahia, would become very important in this quest of showing his theory and proving his theory about the creolity of the Gullah language. So he arrived in Bahia. After a few weeks in Rio de Janeiro, he was received by intellectuals like Mário de Andrade, who was probably the most important intellectual in the 20th century here in Brazil. And he recorded Mário de Andrade. And so we brought back all this material that came from the IU collection, and it was very precious to many people who study this period of time and here in Brazil. So he arrived in Bahia because this is the place he wanted to record and do his fieldwork, especially because of the Candomblé communities. So he stayed a significant period of time in Salvador, the capital, which is, geographically speaking anyway, a part of the Recôncavo, like the entrance of the bay. And obviously, Salvador was the first capital of Brazil in the 16th, 17th century before Rio. And this is a place where we have the most important part of the Afro-Brazilian studies that started in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So Salvador obviously was a main place and a hub for him to study. So he was introduced to many different places and many different candomblé here, there in Salvador, and he recorded the most important candomblé leaders, priests and priestesses that we can think of. Meninia do Gantuá, who became the most famous priestess of Candomblé in the history of Candomblé here. Joãozinho da Gomeia, who was an amazing, as we call them, father of saint priest in the Candomblé tradition. And Martiniano do Bonfim, who had lived a period of his life in Nigeria, because there is a deep connection between Nigeria and Bahia that started at the second half of the 19th century. So Professor Turner did an amazing fieldwork, including going to many different terreiros, which means the Candomblé houses, and belonging to many different what we call nations. So he recorded in Candomblé that derive from the Bantu area of Congo and Angola. Then it went to other candomblés that derive from the Nigeria Yoruba traditions that we call usually Ketu or Nago here. And then of the Jeje tradition of phone languages that came from the old kingdom of Dahomey. And that's probably why it came to especially Cachoeira, because here we have the most likely the oldest Jeje terreiro in Brazil that directly derives from the culture that were brought from the old kingdom of Dahomey in nowadays Benin. And here he recorded also candomblé leaders that my neighbors, I've been living here for 14 years, so I found some people still alive in their 90s that still remember the person that had been recorded by Lorenzo Turner.
How did you approach the people? So at Indiana, you find this trove of music. How did you approach the people in Cachoeira with the treasure that you found? What was that experience like for you?
So the first experience was going to Indiana University, because as an ethnomusicologist, I knew that it was like a mecca for many ethnomusicologists, because the archives of traditional music at Indiana University are among the most important collection of old recordings within the scope of ethnomusicology. But I would not even imagine I could find something so precious and so meaningful. So to be honest, I didn't know of Lorenzo Turner before 2012. And that tells, I guess, a lot of how invisible has been his work, not only in the United States, because I would say that outside academia and people who study linguistics, maybe many people don't know about Lorenzo Turner in the United States. But then in Brazil, we didn't know. And so even I, as an anthropologist and ethnomusicologist and spending almost 3 decades studying candomblé in Bahia, I didn't know about these recordings. So it was just like an amazing surprise for me. And listening to these amazing people of the 1930s and 40s singing for the Orishas was a very deep and spiritual experience for me. And I knew it has to come back. And I was extremely honored and happy when I found the correspondences and the letters that Professor Turner exchanged with people like Melvin Herskovits, who was important for getting him a fellowship and grants to come to Brazil, because he wanted, as I told you before the exhibition of the film, he wanted to come back here and to obviously give back all this material. But as an African-American scholar, it took him many years to come to Brazil to get the one grant that by this time in 1940 was attributed to an African-American scholar. It took him more than 10 years, and in 1950 went to 5 different African countries and did an amazing fieldwork that has not been studied as well. And so he never came back to Brazil. He died in 1972. And that was one of his dreams. I've read these correspondences and these notes where he says, I want to publish records and discs that could come back to the Afro-Brazilian community. So that we knew exactly what we had to do. So we did these 2 books, the catalogs of these recordings, trying to reconnect to the people that would be still alive, or their sons and daughters, and on a spiritual side, or biological side, and then to obviously also study these amazing amount of hundreds and hundreds of songs, prayers, and people speaking in African languages, because we can see and hear in these recordings that candomblé people, candomblé priests and priestesses in Bahia in 1940, after many, many, many generations of slavery in this country, of imposition of Catholicism, and of different traditions that came from Portugal, were able to speak fluently Yoruba, Fon, or even Bantu languages. So the only proof, the only evidence, material evidence that we have in Brazil and that Candomblé people have in Brazil, that these languages were still spoken until the 1940s, are the Turner recordings.
So Javier, give us an example of one of the most profound experiences you passed through in developing this project, because I know the power of candomblé music and the power of the samba, and so I know it's not something to be taken lightly at all. And
Yes.
just to move through these experiences, give us one where you shake your head and you say, "Wow, that's fantastic."
As you've seen in the film, Dona Cici, who used to live with Pierre Verger and gives an interview, and we talk about these recordings that you've seen in the film. So Dona Cici, which I've known for 30 years, she's an amazing 80 years old lady now, and she has more than 50 years of experience within Candomblé. So she said, these men, these African-American men, Lorenzo Turner, did not come to Bahia by chance. The Orishas brought him here. And the same way, probably when you went to the United States in 2012, something took you there and you needed to bring back to Bahia. So I am happy to believe in what Cici tells about that. And when we find that some people almost 80 years later were still alive, obviously I've been back and forth between Bloomington and Bahia, Recôncavo here in Cachoeira. It was 12 times in this period of time, from the archives to our reality here in Brazil. And so I found out that my neighbor here in the small town of Cachoeira, which is so amazingly deeply connected to this Africanness, my neighbor who was an 85-year-old lady, was the widow of one of the priest that sung for Lorenzo Turner. And so I could bring her back the voice of her deceased husband and the photographs. And so it was very emotional for her. And then I found as you've seen in the film, the daughter and the sons of Manuel Falefa, who speak about their father. And you can see how Takuira, that's her name in the film, speaks about her father, who died in 1980. And so through music, through these voices, through the presence that the sound recordings brought back to life here, they could feel the presence of their beloved ones and how important these people have been in the history of this country. A history that has been hidden and turned invisible by systemic racism. And so I would say that being able to bring back the amazing work of the African-American first linguist and pioneer, and an amazing photograph, an amazing linguist, an amazing field recorder, because the recording that Professor Turner did in 1940 are just amazing. I mean, the quality of the recordings allow you to hear the tones of the language, and you can hear the tonality. So it's extremely well recorded. So the presence is very strong. And in some moments, Takuira and other people got so emotional that they went to a spiritual experience, through a trance, and the Orisha came. And so we decided not to show this in the film because it was extremely private and maybe personal, but all of them told us how important it has been, not only to have the photographs. And I knew by the fact to have lived with Pierre Verger, and I've studied this Verger collection and found some people alive of 1946 when Pierre Verger arrived in Bahia. But I, as an ethnomusicologist, I could hear and feel with Candomblé people how strong is the presence of the people through their voice. And I hope in the film we can feel that when we see the people today singing together with the voices of 1940.
Wow. So, what do you think about this connection between scholars of color in the United States and North America and the Afro-Brazilian community, Bahia in particular, but in general? What do you think about this connection?
Okay, I think the connection between Brazil and the United States on this very specific aspect of connecting Black scholars on both sides is extremely important. In the times that we're living, of Black Lives Matter in the United States and the genocide of the Black youth in this country that is ongoing, in the 4 last years that you have experienced in the United States and the 3 or 2 last years we have experienced here under the government we need to unite and to gather the forces. So I would say that people like Lorenzo Turner is one of the pioneers also of this connection, because he came from studying the Gullah people. And we went there. You can see in the film Quinquet. I'll be recording with her tomorrow, live from St. Helena Island, in the Sea Islands area, because we want to connect people, reconnect people. And for many, many decades here in Bahia, we've talked about connecting Africa, reconnecting Africa with Brazil. And I know that many African Americans went to Africa since the 1960s and the 1970s. And obviously, I can see people like you who have come to Brazil so many times, and other African American intellectuals and people within academia that come, and they see how and what Professor Turner used to say and used to hear from the people within Candomblé. They knew about their Africanity. They were proud of this heritage. But on the other hand, here in Bahia and here in Brazil, we had nothing that could be compared to HBCUs, for example. I mean, it's extremely amazing to see that the year that slavery was abolished in the United States in 1865, the first HBCUs were created. And until today, if I'm not wrong, I think you have something around more than 100 HBCUs in the United States. Yeah. So I feel that the HBCU experience, together with the importance of the Black church experience in the United States, has forged a sense of Blackness and of belonging to one people. That people in Brazil, through this amazing, terrible nightmare of the so-called racial democracy, that was a myth, and that we know now, obviously this is a myth, were not, I think, as able to fight against this systemic racism, because there was no official and legal segregation like in the south of the United States, but still, obviously, segregation works on a daily basis in Brazil. And at the very beginning, when Professor Turner arrived in 1940 here, he was amazed by probably the idealized, as you said, vision of this racial democracy that was sold by Brazil to the world, and especially by that time to the United States. And then obviously very quickly he realized, and we can see that in these letters he wrote during his field work, how this was not true. And so I believe that reconnecting people within academia and also communities like the Gullah community. This year in 2020, we had the dream of going back to the Gullah area of Georgia and South Carolina and take people from Candomblé there, and then to bring Quinquet, was in the film, was the chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation, and to bring her to Cachoeira and to the Recôncavo. But obviously, our dreams go on, and we hope that next year in 2021, we can make this a reality. So I believe that both communities that maintain Africanity and Blackness and the African heritage alive in both countries need to reconnect, as well as people who struggle through their activism. We have the equivalent now of the Black Lives Matter, Vidas Negras Importam, here in Brazil, and every 23 minutes, a young black male is killed in this country, and mostly by the police. So this goes together with the systemic and deep racism that we can find in the religious racism towards Candomblé and Afro-Brazilian religions. And this has to be a struggle on a daily basis. And we need the strength of the union of these two countries, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before we end, I have one or two more questions. What is happening? Bring our side of this up to date in terms of the numbers of Afro-Brazilian students enrolled in universities in Brazil, and do you feel this energy of a new generation of young people pushing for liberty and this movement of Black Lives Matters in Brazil?
Oh, yes. Yes, I can feel it. In 1992, when I first arrived in Bahia from France, I was invited to the Federal University of Bahia to give a lecture on my research at the School of Music. And on a daily basis, I was sharing my life with Black people within Candomblé communities. But when I entered the classroom at the Federal University of Bahia, where 75% to 80% of people are Blacks, none of these students at the Federal University were Black, only white, and mostly Catholics or evangelicals. So it was my first contact with these systemic racism that excluded systematically Blacks and poor people from, for example, higher education. And our university, which is the Federal University of Recôncavo, that was created in 2006 by President Lula, as well as other more than 15 new universities during the Workers' Party era from 2003 to 2015. We implemented a quota system and affirmative action program that allowed us today and for the last 10 years and for the future, I hope so, to have today 82% of our students who are Blacks and who are from the Recôncavo and many different places in Brazil. And they are the first in the history of the family to go to university. So it is an amazing social and racial change within the scope of higher education in this country. This is why a coup was happened in 2015 to take President Dilma out of power, because the white elite and the white supremacy of this country could not stand the idea of sharing power and sharing education, and especially higher education in the best federal system universities with Blacks and poor people. But that was the struggle of years and years and decades and many, maybe centuries of people within this area. And I would say Bahia has been a hub for this struggle. And our young students, and I would say especially our female students, Black female students, are the most mobilized. And in 2010, we received here for a 10 days period, and then she came back 5 times, Dr. Angela Davis. And it was just amazing to have her with us here in Cachoeira and there in Salvador. And she identified not only to these African-derived culture, but to our students and to our community and to Candomblé community. So we received a lot of African-American militants and intellectuals and African-American people who are deeply engaged. And so I hope this connection still goes on in the next years to come. And I would say that the neo-fascist agenda that has been implemented in so many countries over the last 5 to 6, 7 years in Europe in North America and in South America, like we've experienced there in the United States and here in Brazil, is creating a wave of reaction. And so everything you've seen and witnessed there in the summer with the Black Lives Matter movement, that the rest of the world have been witnessing, and here everyone have been witnessing what happened there. So this is echoing in the community, and people say no more. The no justice, no peace, no is on every mouth and every heart within the Black community. So I would say that even if we could be very pessimistic, even recently, I would hope and I have the dream of seeing, and truly, I believe that we'll have, and I'll be alive to see the first Black female president in Brazil. And I believe she will be most likely belonging to the LGBT community and maybe belonging to Candomblé, because we know how intersectionality works and strongly has discriminated Black women or the LGBT Black community there and here, and they are at the very, very front, how do you say, the French of battle. I mean, they're, showing us the way and the path for a better future. I hope so.
I love your vision. It's a very bright vision. So, Xavier, thank you for your work, for the sacrifice, for the effort that you've put into teaching in the Hekonkovo, and for this film. I wish you continued success. And when this wave of virus passes, I hope to see you in Salvador or Cachoeira.
Yes, I'm sorry. My cat was. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
It was an amazing opportunity to be with you, to have the film exhibited there in the United States, in the Big Apple, in New York. And even if we're not together, we're only talking virtually, I want to give you a hug as soon as possible. I want us to meet here in Bahia and there in the United States. And I'm truly hopeful about the future. I think the worst is in our past, even if we talk about the pandemic or the politics. So I truly believe that showing how important the work of African American scholar and pioneer like Lorenzo Turner did in the United States, in Brazil, and in many different African countries is extremely important to show how fundamental is the Black contribution in the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.